Okay. Today we're going to talk about, look back at 2017, maybe talk a little bit about what might be expected in 2018. I will apologize in advance if it seems a little disjointed. I had to completely rebuild my MacBook this week in terms of reinstalling everything. And I have a couple of annoying issues where some things aren't working. I don't know if the Mac is dying. It's a few years old. It gets used quite a bit. So I don't know what's going on. There's just like a few little things that I use all the time and they're not working. And it, as my wife will attest, it's frustrating me no end. So pray for my Mac to be healed or whatever, or for a new one to magically appear. Anyway, it was quite a year. As I look back, I went back to just try to pull out some of the highlights, and I started in December, which I've just covered, and I could fill up a whole hour with just what happened in September or December. And then I looked at November, and I could do the same thing with November because I think there were a lot of things from a Bible prophecy standpoint that were very significant. One thing for sure is the world seemed to be very chaotic this year. This was an editorial cartoon in the Financial Times the other day that the world does seem to be on the edge of the cliff and ready to jump. And everybody's seems to be down there encouraging it along. We do talk about this convergence of events all the time, and there certainly were many, many things that converged. I've used the analogy a number of times that geopolitics is like a giant chessboard. And the way it looked this year is somebody came in and took the chessboard and shook it up, and the pieces are just kind of laying around. Now, part of the problem with the world being a chessboard is the Persians, the Iranians, were the ones who sort of invented chess, and the Russians have perfected it in many respects. And so we're at a little bit of a disadvantage when we're dealing with them. It's hard to remember when you think back. It was a year ago today, Barack Obama was still president. And Donald Trump was not, although everybody was already in meltdown. The president has been received a lot of media attention this year, as you may have noticed. This was in the Washington Post this morning. I don't know if this is what they think the president would like to do or what is going on with that was a graphic that was in the editorial section of the Washington Post today as they were talking about what's going to come. It was a year of major wildfires. I don't even have any of those just stunning images, so especially that one where the person was driving down the 405 near Bel Air and the Getty Museum, and the whole hillside was on fire. It's just an absolutely stunning things. And the thing that came about this a lot was you kept hearing the word unprecedented. This is unprecedented, unprecedented. And even some are saying that, I mean, it's cold out there. I don't know if you noticed that this morning. It is cold. I mean, I went out yesterday to get some gas, and I had to use. Look, I'm a fan of global warming. I'm all for it. If I'm having trouble booking a tea time in January, I'm in Ohio. I'm cool with that. Okay. Give me that annoyance. But yesterday I had to break out we have a snowblower. And we had a big storm. Remember, we had that 30 inches or so a few years ago. So I went out and bought a snowblower. Well, we hadn't started it up for over 2 years because it just hasn't snowed that much in Ohio, which I'm fine with. And I worked out a deal with when my neighbor saw it. He goes, "I'll tell you what, I'll buy the gas and maintain it if I get to use it, and I'll do your driveway when I'm doing it." And it's great because I mean he goes out and he does. But you know, it's like takes like 5 minutes to do my driveway now, as opposed to 2 or 3 hours. So he got to use it for the first time yesterday. but I'm all for global warming. But we live in a very chaotic world, and I don't think that it changes. So if you want an outlook for 2018, I would say more of the same. And there's a biblical precedent for that, in that the Jewish prophecy is pattern, and patterns repeat themselves. So if you want to understand what's going to happen before the second coming of Christ, figure out what's going to happen or what happened at or before the first coming of Christ. And what you find is that there were many prophecies about the first coming of Christ that were fulfilled in a very short period of time. There was, we know, the 400 years of silence. We call them the 400 years of silence, although this certainly wasn't silent. There were some significant things that happened in Israel at that time. But one of the things is the prophecies related to the first coming of Messiah. If you take all of them, what you will find is that up until the last week, what we call the Passion Week of Jesus' life, about 40% of the prophecies related to the first coming of Messiah were fulfilled in that roughly 33-year period. 60% of the prophecies were fulfilled in the last week. Prophecies related to the second coming of Christ will undoubtedly be fulfilled in the same way. There will be a gap, a period of time where there's not that much happening, and then there will be some fulfilled, and then there will be, if you will, an explosion, this rapid acceleration. We talk about convergence of all these things happening. And that's what's going to happen at the second coming. And I think we see that. I think the thing that has sort of started the clock was the rebirth of the nation of Israel. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my talk today. But it is, people who watch it, you know, and I watch some of the other guys who talk about Bible prophecy, and all of them are saying, and I'm saying all the time, is this is happening so fast, I can't keep up. Every day there's something, and when I try to condense that down to an hour, roughly an hour, sort of an hour, it's very difficult to do. There was a joke in a class I used to teach at another church. I did a series on the Bible. It was an overview of the Bible, and we called it The Bible in 1 Year. Do you remember? I know some of you remember that because you made up a whole big thing at my 50th birthday party about when do you think John Haller will finish his 1 year series on the Bible. So it went from the Bible in 1 year to the Bible in about a year, and then the Bible that we were just talking about, the Bible. So, and it took about 1.5 years, by the way. So, but all these things are happening very, very quickly, and I don't think that that's going to change in the coming year. Even in a week, I'm sitting there thinking, it's like, for crying out loud, people, just take the week off, you know, let it rest. And I just picking up a few things this morning or over the last few days, it's just like, I'm gonna have to talk about that for about an hour. But here's just some things that I think are kind of significant. Some from this week and some from the week, the over the year, and I'll kind of explain that as I go through. So legal marijuana comes into effect January 1st in California. Now, I don't want to get into the libertarian argument about this, but this is not a good thing. I was out in Colorado, did a conference this past summer. People were at pot shops all over the place out there. And I know I think I went through the drive-through at McDonald's once, someplace, and I think it was McDonald's. I'm pretty sure the person at the window was stoned. They had a very difficult time, you know, figuring out the 2 for $1 special or something like that. It was very simple, and they had a lot of, and I noticed that a couple places that I went, and people that lived there said, yeah, you know, that this is a problem. So this is all we need in California, right? So somebody suggested this week that we sell California to Mexico for $20 trillion, pay off the national debt, and that sort of thing. And maybe that's a solution, but you know what? You know the old saying that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Unfortunately, what happens in California doesn't stay in California, and these trends usually go across because it's the most populous state and it has a lot of influence. It has Hollywood and TV and that sort of thing. So I'll just cover a few things. Bitcoin this week announced some of their architectural plans for their new bank headquarters. Now, that's supposed to be a joke. Probably a little subtle. It's a house of cards, okay? This is another suggestion, is maybe this is what Bitcoin's new headquarters would look like. I don't know if you saw the reports. Apple designed a very fancy store down along the river lakefront in Chicago, and supposedly it has the beautiful curved top, like the wonderful curved texture of the top of a MacBook Pro laptop like this without the cover that I have. And what's happening is it gets cold in Chicago. And when it gets cold, what? It snows. And when it snows, snow gets on the roof. And so the roof is curved. There's no gutter. So what's happening? Well, snow and ice is crashing down onto the customers that are coming in to buy their overpriced equipment. And, excuse me, they're exclusively overpriced equipment. And so everybody's like, why did they design it this way? I mean, can you imagine if they put a store like that in Erie, Pennsylvania, where they had, they have 60 inches of snow this week in a couple days? And another one, which is what? It was unprecedented. This is what they said. But, you know, this week, Bitcoin kind of took a dive in a couple days. It's been going up. And to be honest with you, I make no predictions as to what's going to happen with Bitcoin or anything else. All I can say is one person who I follow for many years on financial stuff is Doug Casey. And Doug's very libertarian. I don't agree with some of his geopolitics and that type of thing. I think he's kind of naive, or as a lot of libertarians have, sort of wishful thinking that if we just don't do anything, everything else in the world will be okay. And that's obviously, I don't think that's true. But he does have some interesting thoughts, like college is a waste of money, I think is one of the points he made in one of his recent articles. And he just said this, that the coming financial crisis, it's a gigantic accident waiting to happen. And he's been saying this for a number of years. And the Fed and other people, bankers in charge of the banking system and financial system, have been, I think, very clever in staving off a financial crisis. But in the meantime, what they've done is they've created a number of bubbles. And I do think Bitcoin is a bit of a bubble. Now, we can argue about that. I know people will write to me and say, you don't understand it. But it's like everything else is, Bitcoin really isn't necessarily tied to anything other than people's belief that it's worth something. Just like the paper money in your pocket, the paper's not worth anything. It's based on full faith and credit, or it's based on a belief that it has this value of exchange. But that changes over time. I mean, gold itself goes up and down. And so Bitcoin is not really, in some respects, backed by anything. So Casey, you can read this at Zero Hedge. Casey just thinks that it's a problem. And what sort of set it off was the opening quote that they did was, Doug, there was an interview with Janet Yellen. She's the head of the Federal Reserve, who's on her way out. And she said that there will never be another crisis in our lifetime, a financial crisis in our lifetime. Now, I don't know if she meant her lifetime, because I don't know, she's like, what, 104 or something like that. So maybe not in her lifetime, but I just think that was kind of a really crazy thing. But it shows what happens when people get caught up in these bubbles. They really lose historical perspective. And economies go up and down, just like the weather. Climate goes up and down. One of the things that was talked about a lot this year was artificial intelligence, and what does that mean, and how's that going to affect everything? And when we look at when we look at Bible prophecy and we talk about things about the mark of the beast, what constitutes the mark of the beast has changed over our lifetimes. Remember, it was It was going to be a tattoo. It was a barcode, a chip under the skin. And now what you see is going on. There was a report this morning or the other day about how, and we noticed this when we came back, we don't travel out of the country that much. When we came back from Israel in late May, was it our hand that they scanned, or was it our face? At the scanner, it was our face at the scanners at JFK when we landed to go through customs. And Department of Homeland Security's been doing this. It's just they're doing it. There's not really authorized by law or anything to do this, and they're collecting a database. I will say mine didn't work, so maybe I have one of those, plastic faces or elastic faces or something like that. I had to get the guy to come over to help, and he finally said, "Here, scan your passport," or whatever. So, and there were many. There are conferences all the time about coming artificial intelligence, what it means, robots, exponential growth, that, computing power could grow in the next 10, 20 years to 1 million times what it is right now. That opens a huge world. That makes it, I would only describe the world of that as weird. And then they're rolling out 5G and that type of thing. At one of the conferences in, I think it was in one of the Arab countries. I think it might have been in Dubai earlier this year. It was the Mobile World Congress. One of the speakers, the head of SoftBank, talked about some of the things that were coming. And one of the things he mentioned was a report from 2015 that talked about 12 threats to civilization. And it's interesting. I want you to look at what I'll read these lists of threats and compare them to what you know about Bible prophecy. Extreme climate change. Doesn't it talk about that, though, in Revelation? Heat and sun burning and that type of thing. Nuclear war, global pandemic, ecological catastrophe, global system collapse, major asteroid impact. Sounds familiar. A supervolcano, synthetic biology, which I think is this CRISPR technology and other things, editing our DNA, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, future bad governance, and unknown consequences. And his point was, this head of SoftBank, and they lend out billions and billions of dollars to a lot of these startup companies, is artificial intelligence will solve 11 of these. And there was even a guy who came out and said this artificial intelligence will become our new God. Remember that? And the guy that used to be, I think he was with Uber to start with. And he's filed a 501c3 religious organization, and you can make tax-deductible deductions to his Church of Artificial Intelligence. So this is 5G technologies, which are very fast internet exchange, are being rolled out in the United Arab Emirates and at least 5 other places here in early 2018. And this will be a game changer. One of the statistics I saw from this Mobile World Congress was that in 2010, people had about 2 devices that was connected to the internet, and they call it the Internet of Things. So on average in the world, people had 2 devices connected to the internet. Soon, by 2020, they estimate people will have 100 devices. I mean, look around your home. You have your television, you have, I have a sound system, and we can connect to our thermostat by Wi-Fi, which makes me nervous because it means if I can connect by Wi-Fi, somebody else could connect by Wi-Fi. And it's all cybersecurity is a huge issue. One of the largest law firms in the country this year had a cyber attack, and the head of the firm said, the future of our business was at risk until we got the problem resolved. And this is going to happen more and more. But other people recognize the apocalyptic nature of things. Here's one interview from earlier in the year that I played.
What is your take on the man the president chose to head the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, who, by the way, just last week said he doesn't agree that carbon dioxide is a primary contributor to climate change?
And that's a perfect example of the problem that I'm describing in the assault on reason. But again, at some point, a false belief collides with physical reality. We are seeing every night on the television news now a nature hike through the book of Revelation. These climate-related extreme weather events have convinced the vast majority of people that the scientists have been right for a long time. We have to address this. But putting someone in the EPA who denies even the most basic scientific truth about this, you know, the old cliches are, you could say the earth is flat, but it doesn't mean you're going to fall off the edge.
And it appears that the former vice president has been consuming more than his fair share of resources of the planet. I'm not judging him. I mean, you know, look, I'm pointing the finger at myself, but a lot of what he predicted, by the way, 20 years ago, he said there would be no polar ice cap, and that hasn't really come true. And he said it would be within 20 years, and we're 20 years out, and it hasn't happened. So there's some things in your life that you look back from historical perspective, and one of the ones is that he was not president. That was a good thing. So. I talk a lot about deception in the church and that type of thing. Here's the modern version of Matthew chapter 7, at least in most modern Bible translations, is judge not. Well, we know that there's a whole context to that. It just says, there's the whole thing about, you know, whatever standard you judge by, you're going to be judged yourself. And I don't have a problem with that. It's a biblical concept, but a lot of people just say, judge not. Judge not. Don't you dare judge me. You judgmental person, you're just such a judgmental, well, aren't you judging me when you call me a judgmental person? And it becomes very difficult for them to respond to that. So this is what's quoted all the time. I won't go in today, but the meltdown, theological, biblical meltdown in evangelicalism accelerated this week, or no, not just this week, this year, at an epic scale. This case was decided again this week in the Oregon Court of Appeals, the Sweet Cakes Bakery case, a couple that did not want to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. They were found liable. They have to pay their hearing was this week, and they were long decision, 50-some pages, ruled against their claims of you're making us make a cake that says something, you're making us create something, and that's a violation of our First Amendment principles. The Oregon court, which consists of a bunch of weak-minded liberals, and I think I can say that and justify that, just rejected all those arguments out of hand. My suggestion has been, you know, these bakeries and stuff is bake a cake, sell a cake to a couple, but tell them I only bake one kind of wedding cake. And the wedding cake always comes with a male and female person on the top, and it comes with these Bible verses that talk about God's design for marriage. That's the only, if you want to buy that cake, that's the one I make. I'm not going to make another one for you. I'll change the colors, but I'm not going to change the design. You can't force me. And I don't know why they don't do that, but it just hasn't. Well, one of the biggest changes, of course, was a new president here in the United States. And it's interesting, this is the New York Times the other day. The insurgent president is changing unpredictably the U.S. global role. And it is changing. I mean, it is changing rather dramatically and rather quickly. Not the least of which was his announcement back on December 6th, which was his announcement that we're going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We're not going to define the borders of the city of Jerusalem, but we're going to say Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. It's a fact. There's a country called Israel, and they have a capital, and it's in Jerusalem. Well, that has just got everybody all upset geopolitically. Macron from France and all these other people in the world are speaking out against it. The entire United Nations is against it. And when they vote on it, it's really the United States and a few other small countries standing against the world, along with Israel, to say, we think the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. And I went there this year, by the way. We were blessed to be able to go. And I can tell you, I observed the facts on the ground are that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. It hits you in the face when you stay in Jerusalem. It's clear that you're in Israel, although Google Maps doesn't get it. One day, Brian Schrager and I took a walk around the old city, and as you're looking on your map, you keep getting this message like because they base everything on the 1949 or 67 lines or whatever, and you keep getting this message, you're entering a foreign country. I mean, you're walking up the hill by the old city, or down out there near the Dung Gate where you would go up to the Temple Mount, and you're walking there, and it says you're entering a foreign country, and you come out and you go into the old city, and you come out, you're entering a foreign country, and it's this constant warning that Google apparently has adopted the view that Jerusalem isn't the capital of Israel. But I have news for them. I don't care what you do with your app. I love your app, but your app is, well, I guess the whole thing about artificial intelligence is, part of it is it's only as intelligent as the people who design it. And, so stupid people can, intelligence is scale. And so, artificial intelligence, where's it going to fall on that scale? And everybody assumes, oh, we designed it, it's just going to be fantastic. So this week, continued things. There was deadly blasts in Afghanistan. I think 80 people died. There was an attack on a Christian church, Christian area in Egypt yesterday. 9 people died. And this constant news about all of these attacks. General Robert Neller, who's the head of the U.S. Marines, said this week: I hope I'm wrong, but there's a war coming. You're in a fight here, an informational fight, a political fight by your presence. He was talking to his Marines, and he was telling them, you need to get ready because I think we're going to war. Now, whether he was just speaking as sort of, getting his troops to organize, it is clear that there are a lot of flashpoints in the world. There's North Korea, there's the Middle East. The situation in Africa in different parts of Africa is just Zimbabwe, South Africa, the Republic of the Congo, Libya. There's just these flashpoints everywhere. I saw an interesting statistic, and I'm not sure that this is accurate. And I just read it quickly, and I meant to go back to it and didn't have time. But it said that in all of the wars of human history, up until the beginning of the 20th century, 40 million people died. Now, I'm not sure that's accurate because the Muslim invasions of India killed somewhere around 80 to 100 million, maybe as high as 200 million people. But I think the more accurate thing would say is that all of the wars of human history up until 1900 killed about the same amount of people that were killed just in the 20th century, which was about 230 million died in wars and conflicts. That's a pretty stunning thing. That is, I think, apocalyptic because Jesus said there'll be wars, rumors of wars, and that sort of thing. And starting in with the First World War, up through the close of the 20th century, over 200 million people on this planet died in wars, let alone all the ones that died from the flu pandemic back right after World War I. That's not even including those. So this is what I think we should expect. I mean, Jesus told us that it would be like a woman travailing in birth, as these things, I've never given birth. Closest I came is I passed a kidney stone once. I hear it's the same thing or it's worse. You know, I don't want to get into an argument about it. It was, listen, it was bad, and the pains got closer and closer together as, you know, it got ready to exit. And it's the same thing that's going to be as the Lord, if we get closer to the Lord's return, we're going to see more and more of these wars. One of the things that's happening right now is the situation on the north of Israel, along the northern border, Lebanon and the Golan Heights. The reports this week, I might have another slide about this in a moment, but essentially that rebel groups are leaving the area around the Golan Heights, and the Assad regime is now assuming control of that again. The concern on Israel's part is that that will allow Iranian troops or Iranian support, militias and that sort of thing to get closer to the Golan border. And this is of major concern to Israel. I think that Iran has its own issues, and Iran is very good at getting other people to fight its wars. They're good at doing the proxy warfare thing. But Hezbollah now has had a lot of training in war. They've been fighting in Syria now since the Syrian civil war started back in 2011. It was almost 7 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. Half the country in Syria doesn't live where they used to live. Major cities have been reduced to rubble. It appears, from my perspective, that Assad, with the help of Putin, drove out the Sunni groups in large part from the Sunni areas. They just destroyed the cities. People had to get up and leave and go someplace else to live. And that's changed the demographic composition of the nation of Syria, to the extent that there is still, we pretend that there are these countries here called Syria and Iraq. And there's all these different countries of the world: Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Iran, Russia, Turkey, all have these competing interests. And sometimes it's hard to tell who is who in these places. One of the important players, though, in this relationship, and we talk a lot about Ezekiel 38 and 39, and a coalition of countries that will come against Israel in the last days. And we certainly know, I mean, a lot of us think that Russia is part of that coalition, Iran and Turkey are parts of that coalition, and of course, the areas of what today would be Sudan and Libya. And we've seen all of those pieces start to come together. And one of the biggest ones of these was Turkey coming into this coalition, even though Turkey is a Sunni Islam and Iran is Shia. If it involves going against Israel, they'll be on board with each other. And Putin has had major problems with Islamic groups in his country. The Islamic population of Russia continues to grow. There were some reports in, I think it was in Foreign Policy and some other intelligence journals, that the Muslim population of Moscow is approaching 25%. And that the Muslim population of the Russian army is at a similar growing at the same time. And so Putin has to do some things to try to manage his own Islamic problem within his country. And so that's why he's joined up with Iran and Syria to address the Sunni issue in Syria. And listen, what happened in Syria with the bombing of these cities, reducing them to rubble, go look up Aleppo and drone and see the damage that's been done to Aleppo and Homs and even Damascus, which has been in large part really reduced to rubble. You know, when the Bible talks about Damascus being a ruinous heap, you think, well, is that Bible prophecy been fulfilled yet? And the answer is, I don't think it's been fulfilled yet, but it won't take much to reduce that city, Damascus, to a ruinous heap. It already is in large part a ruinous heap. And this is the exact same thing that Putin did in Chechnya. And look, he had a major problem in Chechnya. So they went in and they killed, I think, 25% of the population was killed. Half the population was made to move someplace else because of the bombing by Russian forces over a period of years. So I think the same tactics were employed down in Syria. And the result is we have this massive immigration crisis, the moving into Europe. It's changing the demographic thing. Erdogan this year was given essentially dictatorial powers in a referendum. He didn't win by much, but he has willingly assumed the role of a dictator. He wants to be a sultan or a caliph in Islam. He wants to revive the Ottoman Empire. And he even talked about, there's this, he gave a speech where he talked about, he wanted to move the southern border of Turkey, which, now is Iraq and what we used to call Iraq and what we used to call Syria, and we still call them that. Like we engage in this fiction that they actually are coherent countries. And he wanted to move the borders down to where he would get Aleppo and Raqqa and Mosul and all the way down even to almost Baghdad. And that's one of his goals. And he says that. And if you think that there's no alliance, this was a picture just from November, just a little over 5 weeks ago in Sochi, Russia. You had the head of Iran, you had Putin, and you had Erdogan. Turkey and Russia this week signed a deal to give them, Russia would give Turkey their S-400 anti-aircraft missiles. This is a significant development because for a long time, Turkey's been part of NATO. They want them to be part of the EU, or it wants to be part of the EU. And it's been this kind of back and forth for decades as to whether they're going to be brought into the European Union. They're a member of NATO, but now they're getting these anti-aircraft missiles from Russia, which can change the balance of power. One of the ways the United States and other countries project powers through their air force. And I think this is another area of concern to Israel, because if they ever have to do something with regard to Iran, now they have this technology that's being sold or given by Russia to Turkey to deal with. Now, Israel is pretty smart, and they seem to be able to fly places, and nobody ever seems to fire a shot at them. I remember when they destroyed that the North Korean nuclear reactor that was being built in Syria 10 years ago. They flew across southern Turkey, came down, bombed it, and left. And my understanding is they were never fired at in that whole time because they have figured out some cloaking technology that is very good. So they're able to do this. This was also the year of the what people continued, leaders and police and that type of thing, called the Lone Wolf terrorist attack, which really should be called the Known Wolf terror attack, because it turns out, well, yeah, we were watching that guy for the last 6 months. We had him in custody a month ago, and we couldn't charge him with anything, so we had to let him go. Sweden, this was kind of a bit of a humorous thing, that Sweden had adopted a new, because of the issue they've had with immigration there, that they had adopted a new symbol for their legislature using their colors. One of the other people that came on the scene, this is interesting. Well, 6 months ago, this guy came on the scene.
France will not give up the fight. I call on you to remain confident. We will succeed because we are fully committed. Because wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again. Thank you.
So now he came, it was just a little over 6 months ago that he was elected to office. It seems like it was 4 years? He served half the time in office that Trump has, roughly. And he had that kind of weird, when the celebration ceremony, where the pyramid and his hands and the light on the pyramid right above his head, it was very bizarre. Let's just put it that way. I think it certainly showed where he came from. And so one of the things that he did to kind of show you where France is going, there's a new Louvre that was open in Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Excuse me, Abu Dhabi. And this is what they projected on some screens that they put up over the pyramid at the Louvre in Paris, about what's being seen. And so Macron and his wife, I would say, if I was cruel, I would say wife/mother, went to Abu Dhabi to dedicate this thing. And very interesting article. I'm trying to remember where I saw this. But he talked about, I think I saw it maybe in Gatestone, and he gave this thing about, listen to what he says, this Louvre of the desert and light is that message sent out again to all forms of obscurantism, that message sent out in the bravery you wanted to show in restoring your religion to what it's always done. He's talking about the Muslim religion. As you've always reaffirmed very bravely, it's a message of profound syncretism. Your religion can't be loved here without a reminder that all the great monotheistic religions were born here in this region, and that Islam was born out of this palmist, whatever, of cultures and civilizations which ensure our religions and civilizations are intractably linked, and that those who seek to make people believe, wherever in the world it may be, that Islam is built by destroying the other monotheisms are liars and are betraying you. So how do you think this is going to go in France with that attitude? It's like, I will say this, Macron's only been in office for maybe 6 months now, and he's already mastered the French art of surrender. So that's good. China has announced this thing, and Brian Schrager, our friend at Jerusalem Journal, wrote a really good article for the Jerusalem Post about this, the China One Belt, One Road initiative. And this is a picture of it here on the right. This is from the HSBC Bank website. This is what it looks like. And what China wants to do is they want to establish this link between Asia and Europe. And where does it go through? It goes right through the heart of the Middle East. And what's right in the heart of the Middle East? It's Israel. And so there are all these initiatives that are being taking place to do this. And go look up Brian Schrager's article and read about it. And we talked a little bit about it earlier this year as well, that China says this will reshape the 21st century economy. And they're pushing it. Talking about trains and sea and land and, you know, natural resources and that type of thing. And Saudi Arabia is kind of building on it with that city that they want to build there along the Red Sea called Neom. And it's interesting. So Pam and I, in May, we went to Israel. And it's the third time we were there. And this time we did it different. We didn't do a tour, a formal tour. We just had a guide for a few days to take us around. And one of the things, when we were there, President Trump came to town, went to the Wailing, I call it the Wailing Wall. It's really, I think it's more, they prefer you call it the Western Wall. He went to the Western Wall, first U.S. president to do that. I think Vice President Pence is going as well soon, I think, and he'll also go to the Western Wall. And in fact, it was announced this week that they want to do a high-speed rail link and a train station at the Western Wall and name it after Trump. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. There's a lot of logistical problems in that they would have to build a tunnel under the old city, and you can imagine what kind of problems that's going to create in certain areas of people that live in Israel. They're not going to be very happy with that. And, you know, if you think there were, you know, riots over putting metal detectors at the Temple Mount entrances, just wait till they want to say, we're just going to build a tunnel underneath. It'll be a flashpoint. But they announced it this week in Israel. They're going to name the train station near the Western Wall after President Trump. But we were there during the period of time. Now, they operate on their Jewish calendar, and the Jewish calendar is different than the American calendar. So when we talk about the Six-Day War from June 7th, 1967, that really was 28 ER, 5727 on the Jewish calendar. And I pointed this out. So that day translated to this year, it ended up as May 24th. And while we were there in Jerusalem, for example, on May 24th, it was Yom Yerushalayim Day. It was Yom Jerusalem Day. Yom Yerushalayim. Jerusalem Day. It was the day when they celebrated the 50th anniversary of the reunification of the city of Jerusalem. Something that Jews had thought, prayed, hoped for, and was really embedded in their DNA for 2,000 years. And that day we were there. We went out to the Holocaust, the Yad Vashem that morning, the Holocaust Museum. Incredibly moving experience, and just the inhumanity of man demonstrated over and over as you walked through that place. But then we came back to Jerusalem, and we were on Jaffa Street, and we saw this. And we saw this all over Jerusalem that day. This is a group of young Jewish students. And that day they said in Jerusalem, there are more people in Jerusalem today than any time in the history of Jerusalem. And it was a bit of a madhouse. And you see these kids celebrating the nation of Israel. And then we got these two kids, stragglers here. You'll see them in just a second coming up. And yep, put me on Facebook and or YouTube. But it was a stunning thing. But the interesting thing was that day on the Jewish calendar in 1967 and on the 50th anniversary, on that day on the Jewish calendar, there are assigned readings. And the readings include part of the Torah, and they also include the Psalms. There's a reading from the Psalms for every day. And for that day on the Jewish calendar, and I don't think this is a coincidence, it's Psalm 135 to 139. And look at what this says. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. Psalm 136, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, give thanks unto the God of gods, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his mercy endureth forever. To him who alone doeth great wonders, for his mercy endureth forever. To him that by wisdom made the heavens, for his mercy endureth forever. To him that stretched out the earth above the waters, for his mercy endureth forever. To him that made great lights, for his mercy endureth forever. The sun to rule by day, for his mercy endureth forever. The moon and stars to rule by night, for his mercy endureth forever. To him that smote Egypt and their firstborn, for his mercy endureth forever, and brought out Israel from among them, for his mercy endureth forever, with a strong hand and with a stretched out arm, for his mercy endureth forever. To him which divided the Red Sea into parts, for his mercy endureth forever, and made Israel to pass through the midst of it, for his mercy endureth forever. But overthrew Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea, for his mercy endureth forever. To him who led the people through the wilderness, for his mercy endureth forever. To him which smote great kings, for his mercy endureth forever, and slew famous kings, for his mercy endureth forever. Sion, king of the Amorites, for his mercy endureth forever, and Og, the king of Bashan, for his mercy endureth forever, and gave their land for a heritage, for his mercy endureth forever, even a heritage unto Israel his servant, for his mercy endureth forever, who remembered us in our low estate, for his mercy endureth forever, and hath redeemed us from our enemies, for his mercy endureth forever, who giveth food to all flesh, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, give thanks unto the God of heaven, for his mercy endureth forever. And so the young men who at Yeshiva would have that day read this in the Psalms were celebrating the mercy of God in restoring the nation of Israel. Now, this is not finished, okay? There's plenty of problems in Israel, okay? But we know prophetically God has some things to do. And then in Psalm 137, listen to this. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning, her dexterity. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. And one of the places that PM and I went, we went to Hebron, and we stood on the tell at Hebron, and we looked. You see here, well, where is my... See, this is why I don't want... Anyway, over here on the right, you see the building, the big structure, sort of in the middle of the right center of the photograph, right middle. That's the cave of Machpelah. And our guide, Joel Kramer, when we were there, we stood on the tell, which is in no man's land. Hebron is the most divided city on the planet. We talk about divided Jerusalem. Nothing compares to Hebron because of the terrorist attacks that have occurred from both sides. They've divided Hebron, and there's a no man's land, and we went to no man's land, and that's where the tell at Hebron is. This is where David ruled over Israel for 7 years. And Joel said, I only have one, and you look and you see the cave of Machpelah where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. There is no question about this. That building there was built by Herod 2,000 years ago. The stuff around the top was built, 500 years ago probably or so. But the basic structure there has stood for 2,000 years, which was built 2,000 years after Abraham bought it for a burial place. And you stand there and Joel says, I only have one verse to show you the significance of this place. And early in the morning, we had gone to Mamre, also in Hebron, where there's a Herodian structure, a verified archaeological site, historical site, where Abraham met with Yahweh by the great oaks of Mamre. And you can see the places in the bedrock where the trees had grown. And he said, so at the end, sort of near the end of the day, our time in Hebron, he says, we've been to the cave, we've been to Mamre, and here's the verse. Matthew 1, 1. The genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham, the son of David. Because where we stood was near where David's palace in Hebron was. And it was great. I mean, this is the cave there, the Herodian structure. Here on the right, you see the little ramp. That was called the seventh step. For 700 years, the Jews were only allowed to go that close to that building. They were not allowed to enter the building. That all changed in 1967 after the war. That we were there when they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of that. And now there's a synagogue up top on the right, and there's a mosque on the left. It's divided. You got to go through security checkpoints on either side, and I walk up a lot of steps for each one of them. But for 700 years, Jews that's as close as they could get. Now, 30-some years ago, there were some people there's a entrance down, the cave is below that structure, and they went down to the cave and they found bones. It's a fact. You can find the testimony of one of the people that were there online. I don't think there was any place that I've ever been that impacted me more in terms of Bible prophecy than Hebron, because of the unending conflict. between the sons of Jacob and the sons of Esau and Ishmael, which continues to this day. We were there, it was after we were there that UNESCO came out and said, Hebron is a Palestinian site. But things have changed. January 1st last year I did an update and I apologize in advance, but I'm just doing historical review. I played this clip, which was a former government official of the United States defending the United States failure to veto Resolution 2334, which called for a Palestinian, well, you can read 2334. Whoops.
On the ground, violence, terrorism, incitement, settlement expansion, and the seemingly endless occupation. They are combining to destroy hopes for peace on both sides and increasingly cementing an irreversible one-state reality that most people do not actually want. Today, there are a similar number of Jews and Palestinians living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. They have a choice. They can choose to live together in one state, or they can separate into two states. But here is a fundamental reality. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both.
Now, I question his statistics. Now, there's a new sheriff in town, and in her first press conference at the UN, just a few weeks later, she said this. Well,
I'm here to say the United States will not turn a blind eye to this anymore. I'm here to underscore the ironclad support of the United States for Israel. I'm here to emphasize the United States is determined to stand up to the UN's anti-Israel bias. We will never repeat the terrible mistake of Resolution 2334 and allow one-sided Security Council resolutions to condemn Israel. Instead, we will push for action on the real threats we face in the Middle East.
And here's,
I'm here to say, the United States will not turn a blind eye.
Here's a little thing about
the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 2334 called out Israel for what it calls settlement activity beyond the 1967 lines. So we took a look at a settlement on the map. This is the Golan Heights. It is home to Jews, Bedouins, Druze, Arabs, and Christians, all living together peacefully and sometimes even working together on some wine spectator-rated vineyards. And over on this side of the border, that's Syria, the portion that's being fought over by Islamic State, that's ISIS, the Bashar Assad regime, and a number of Sunni extremist groups. According to the UN resolution, the Arabs and Jews living together peacefully on this side of the border are in flagrant violation of international law, unless Israel leaves this land, in which case it would go to ISIS. Just to be clear, these are war criminals, and these are the people they're supposed to give land to.
I think it's one of the more powerful videos I've seen. At UN Human Rights, the Israeli ambassador said this.
Israel has used the worst kind of abuse, ethnic cleansing, and imposing a regime of apartheid.
Israel continues to exercise apartheid in Palestine, which constitutes a crime against humanity, violence and terrorism that are being exercised against the Palestinian people.
These violations include the building of apartheid wall to legitimize the theft of land and to Judaize Jerusalem.
The separation wall is an example of the apartheid policy practiced by Israel.
Israel's practices of discrimination as well as extremism.
United Nations Watch have the floor. Mr. President, let me begin by putting the following on the record. Everything we just heard from the world's worst abusers of human rights, of women's rights, of freedom of religion, of the press, of assembly, of speech, is absolutely false and indeed Orwellian. Today's report does not consider Israelis to be deserving of human rights, consistent with the approach of this Council, where today's notorious agenda item against Israel completely ignores their human rights. Now, over the weekend, President Abbas announced he was giving his highest medal to Rima Khalaf, who resigned from the Economic Commission of Western Asia, a Beirut-based UN agency of 18 Arab states, after Secretary General Guterres rightly instructed her to remove an absurd report which accused Israel of, quote, apartheid. Mr. President, why is Mr. Abbas celebrating a report written by the notorious Richard Falk after his own Palestinian mission here tried in 2010 to remove Mr. Falk on the basis that he was, quote, a partisan of Hamas, as we know from WikiLeaks? The accusation against Israel is absurd. Israel's 1.5 million Arabs.
The delegation of Palestine has the floor.
More than one statement goes beyond the mandate of this sitting, using unacceptable terms about Ms. Rima Khalaf, and so we would like this to be stopped. We have noted some terms which are humiliating vis-à-vis the Council, and we call for the respect of our traditions within the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
We would support the viewpoints that have already been expressed by the State of Palestine as well as Egypt.
Now, the previous speaker can continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel's 1.5 million Arabs, whatever challenges they face, enjoy full rights to vote and to be elected in the Knesset. They work as doctors and lawyers. They serve on the Supreme Court. Now, I'd like to ask the members of that commission that commissioned that report, the Arab states from which we just heard, Egypt, Iraq, and the others, how many Jews live in your countries? How many Jews lived in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco? Once upon a time, the Middle East was full of Jews. Algeria had 140,000 Jews. Algeria, where are your Jews? Egypt used to have 75,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Syria, you had tens of thousands of Jews. Where are your Jews? Iraq, you had over 135,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Mr. President, where is the real apartheid? Why is there a UN commission on the Middle East that does not include Israel? From the 1960s and the 70s, they refused to include Israel. Where is the apartheid, Mr. President?
Good for him. And so now we know Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that they expect 10 countries to be moving their embassies to Jerusalem. The tipping point on that was President Trump's announcement. The Palestinians are upset. A very interesting report, a couple of reports. This is from the Begin Sadat Center. It's a website you should look at, Begin Sadat Center. Israel's inelegant options in Judea and Samaria, and it's written by a former IDF general who talks about the fact that we have no good options. We can't allow essentially we can't allow the establishment of a Palestinian state. And of course, when that happens, people on the left say, oh, you know, if we just have one state, we'll lose the Jewish character of the state, to which this general rightly says, yet isn't it ironic that the Jewish character of Israel argument is being pushed by those who realize are far from religious belief and practice, by those who are opposed to Jewish national identity legislation currently before the Knesset, by those who oppose religious legislation in Knesset on core matters like Sabbath and Pesach observance. And conversely, isn't it strange that the most religious and nationalistic Israelis seem the least concerned about the Jewish character of Israel argument in the Palestinian state context? So it appears that the concern for the Jewish state expressed by the political left is in large measure a hypocrisy, counterfeit concern that is brandished for left-wing political purposes. Amen. And so now there's this conflict, that's been going on all year. Hamas and Fatah are getting together. Dr. Mordecai Kedar, and you should go to his Mordecai, M-O-R-D-E-C-H-A-I, Kedar, K-E-D-H-A-R or K-E-D-A-R.com. And he did an interview this week. You can also find it at Avi Abelo, A-B-E-L-O-W's Facebook page. The notion of a Palestinian state is now dead. In fact, what Dr. Kedar said is really when I've shared some of the things that he would say to Saudi Arabia, in this peace process, like, hey, listen, we'll recognize your right to control Mecca and Medina, which you never had until the 1930s, but we'll recognize it you let us have Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, okay? And you can put your embassy anywhere in Jerusalem. You let us put our embassy in Riyadh, you know. So Kedar says, listen, and this is you need to go watch this 25-minute interview, and I'll just summarize it this. He said the Palestinian state notion was born dead because what President Trump and our State Department and all the other leaders of the world don't realize is that the Arab culture is very tribal. And this was prophesied about Ishmael and his descendants many years ago, that he would be what? A wild donkey, and his brother's hands would be against the other. And he talks about the fact that Mahmoud Abbas, when he's in Ramallah, doesn't go outside because the tribal culture in the Arab state is so strong that they don't consider him to be legitimate to live in Ramallah because he's from up in Galilee. And so when you have these disparate people with all these different tribes living in this area, you will never get a cohesive state to form. And and I think the Palestinians are really, they never really existed. Even Arabs are saying they never really existed before 1967. And so it's very interesting. Now, we also went to Bethel, which is up here on the left. Ramallah is down in the lower left-hand corner. Bethel is up here in the center. You see Highway 60 coming down through. Over here on the right is where I is. I'll talk more about that this week, but we were able to go up there, and there was nobody else there. I mean, there were no other tourists or anything there when we were there. But on the way up there, and on the way as we went up into Judea and Samaria, we would pass this place. Now, I've talked to people who live in Israel, and they've never heard about what this is like. And this is Tel El Ful, also known as Gibeah, and it is the tribal home of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, why is this significant? And what is that building that's there? And I think Brian and Schrager and I will do a little more detail about this. But this is, and I talked to somebody who's been to Israel dozens of times. I said, did you see Gibeah? What are you talking about? I never heard of it. You know? And I talked to somebody else who lives in Jerusalem. They just weren't aware of it. This is Benjamin. Why is Benjamin significant? Where did the first king of Israel come from? What was his tribe? Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Gibeah, this is the seat of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, what is this building? Well, nobody ever asked King Abdullah, why did you or your father, I mean, you're in charge of the Temple Mount right now. Why didn't you give it to the Palestinians? Why didn't King Hussein give what they call the West Bank? Why didn't you give? You controlled it. When Israel won the 67 war, they didn't beat the Palestinians. There was no Palestine. They beat Jordan and they beat Egypt and Syria. There was no Palestine. And King Hussein, from the time he came to power, after his father or grandfather was assassinated on the Temple Mount, he never gave it to the Palestinians. King Abdullah, you never gave it to the Palestinians. Iraq, you have laws against the Palestinians. Jordan, you keep these people in these squalor in refugee camps 70 years after the Arab-Israeli War of 1948-49. But what's this building? This building, and it's very prominent. You go up there, you can see from Tel Aviv to the Dead Sea, from Ramallah to Jericho. You can see the whole area from up there. It's a very high, prominent point. King Hussein went up there when they controlled this area after the 48 war, and he was building his palace there. Then the 67 war happened, and the palace has stood unfinished for 50 years. Now, why did he choose? Do you understand why he chose that area? He chose the area not just because it had a nice view. He chose the area to make a point. This is where the first king of Israel was from. I'm building on his land because I'm in charge. Because this is what happens over there. So right now, let me just finish up real quick. There are Iranian protests going on, these anti-regime protests. I don't know how powerful they are. President Trump tweeted, "Go protesters." This is a big change. This is another big change from Obama. Obama, when 2009, when protests happened, Obama was like, "What are you talking about? Don't know what you're talking about." Why? Because he did everything in his administration to get that Iranian deal. Even the State Department came out with a thing, we support it, and Prime Minister Netanyahu had this to say.
Get a load of this. A few days ago, Iran's foreign minister tweeted, "Very happy and peaceful Christmas to all." I wonder what the Christians jailed this month in Iran would think about that tweet. I wonder what Iranian youth would think about that tweet. But sadly, the regime bans Twitter. Except, of course, if you're a high-ranking official. Now imagine you're praying quietly in your home, surrounded by your family, and all of a sudden, armed thugs burst in and drag you away to prison. They torture you merely for practicing your Christian faith. Welcome to Iran. Saying Merry Christmas while jailing Christians in your own country is the height of hypocrisy. If you stand for freedom, share this message. If you stand against hypocrisy, share this message. And above all, say a quiet prayer for our Christian brothers and sisters who are suffering at the hands of this cruel Iranian regime. We stand with you, brothers and sisters. The world stands with you.
And so the report, this was just in some of the Israeli press today about U.S. and Israel have reached a plan to counter the Iran agreement. And this is and I'll finish with this. There are concerns that up around Mount Hermon, along the Golan border, that the Iranian regime is advancing on rebel forces there. Exactly how far they've gone, how big of a problem it is, but is of concern because this is part of what Iran is trying to do. Iran is trying to build a pathway for them from Iran to the Mediterranean. And they're building roads today. I mean, right now, in the area of Mosul and along the Euphrates River there, to make this highway, to get them from one place to the other. And this is a major concern of Israel. And how far they'll let it go, I don't know. It does seem to fit within the Ezekiel 38 and 39 scenario. So, and I think the protests that you see, I don't know how far they'll go. You cannot peacefully coexist with that regime. This week, Ayatollah Khomeini, you can check his blog. He's got a blog in English. And he said, you know, Merry Christmas, and a lot of you Christians don't really understand the teachings of Christ very well, which is kind of rich, with dripping with hypocrisy. But he also had a blog at the end of November where he said, the time of the Mahdi is here. Now, I don't believe that Islamic eschatology is inspired. But whether it's inspired or not is they believe it is. And the difference with that type of eschatology is they believe they can bring about the end of the days by doing certain things. So they, you know, everybody always accuses the Christians of this. We're sort of passive spectators in many respects, but they actually believe they will bring about the end of days, the Armageddon or whatever, and the coming forth of the Mahdi. And Ayatollah Khomeini is saying the Mahdi's time is here because he's in our hearts, and we want him. So, as again, I don't believe Islamic eschatology is inspired, but my belief is irrelevant because they believe it's true. And they believe this is the time. They believe this is the time when all this is going to come about. So when I see the protests happening and that sort of thing, What do regimes like that do when they're starting having problems at home? They focus on an external enemy, don't they? Who is their big enemy? Big Satan, little Satan, U.S., Israel. And so I just think that it fits even more so within the Ezekiel 38, 39 scenario that we know is coming. So, pray for people in power, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, share the gospel with your neighbors, and let's go. Father, thanks so much for your grace and mercy, the truth of your word, and the reality of what your Son did for us on the cross. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.